I know when my ambition is out of control, when I feel unable to celebrate their successes.
And welcome today to Restore Healthcare Project. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang here with my beloved Dr. Lysa Owen. Welcome again to potentially a very interesting discussion.
It's lovely to be back again.
So good. Well, today we want to delve a little bit into a great need that clinicians have, often unspoken, which is actually talking about their needs. And I think that this is an area of healthcare that's rising more and more to our awareness as clinician burnout is becoming more and more prominent, and we feel this strong need to address it in ourselves and in each other, and we feel the consequences of it all the time. And certainly, I think there's this heart cry in me to restore to clinicians their dignity and humanity. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
So true, isn't it? I mean, burnout, it's such a dominant word and phrase that we hear in all of our contexts in work with clinicians and for clinicians, isn't it?
Yeah. And you find it even being talked about in your sector of healthcare, which is at the very beginning phases of clinicians learners, because there's need even at that point to begin to set building blocks in place to support clinicians.
Absolutely. It's so key in medical education that we are offering tools to help make our future workforce resilient, and actually to help them cope and to help them stay in our workforce family.
Yeah. And I think it's a shift, isn't it? Healthcare culture has not always been that way. And how would you describe that? Like, how has healthcare perhaps devalued or suppressed the needs and the values of clinicians themselves? We spend so much time teaching how to really meet the needs of our patient population. But has healthcare valued clinicians?
It's such a big topic, isn't it? Really interesting. I guess we could look at the externals, couldn't we? You could kind of, that type of question leads us to, well, we have to work long hours. We often have to relocate in order to pursue our career.
Yeah.
Moving away from family, friends, support networks. And, it feels a little bit, when you look at it from the outside, it feels a bit brutal, doesn't it? To take the people who are going to be providing compassion and care for hurting people, and we make them work really long hours. We exhaust them. Some things about our medical education system can make our young students and doctors feel really inadequate. We pluck them away from their support networks, and then we still expect them to be able to draw on compassion and empathy. And when you look at it in that way, we think, well, how ridiculous. So there are systemic issues going on around about working hours, around about relocation, moving away from our networks and so on. But there's other things going on, aren't there, at societal levels, where we have people having to relocate, and people who are working long hours are facing stresses and difficulties of all sorts. So I think in some senses, when we talk about some of those issues in our clinicians, the carers, actually you could say, well, many of these actually apply to lots of other groups as well. Yeah. So, hopefully they're applicable outside of that.
Do you think that there is a cultural sense within healthcare of needs that clinicians are not supposed to have?
Yeah, so we can look at those behavioural things and those systemic things, and then we can look at the more relational and the very individual and personal things then, can't we? We can go from that big picture stuff to kind of focus in a little bit more. And I think lots of that we would, in education, would describe as the hidden curriculum. So nobody necessarily says out loud on your first day of medical individual training, you have to leave your humanity, your own humanity and your
True.
own, your own needs at the door. But it's often there implicitly and sometimes explicitly. The patient's needs come first.
Yes.
And yet common sense tells us, put on your own oxygen mask before attempting to help others with theirs.
Yeah.
And we can often, as a platitude, encourage our healthcare providers to do that. We can say to them, look after your own well-being. And we can offer them some tools, but some of those are helpful. Some of them are less helpful. But there's still need, isn't there? There's still a deep need in people to be able to align the work and what they do with their deep held personal values. And I think that's a more difficult narrative and a more difficult lesson to help our learners with that. Well, first of all, you need to have some time to reflect on what are my values, what's my fundamental worldview, particularly around about the question of human suffering. And we need to help all of our colleagues and professionals really identify and own and really have a deep sense of their personal values, their worldview. What is truth? What is that truth? What does that infer in terms of my values? And how do I ensure that how I work, where I work, and what I do is aligned with those values?
I think what you're saying is if you don't come in with a strong sense of self and your values and how you see the world, you are going to be easily wrapped up and entangled in the predominant culture and expectations of this sphere. And you might even get a bit confused and entangled in the huge amount of human need and suffering that you're facing, which would make you vulnerable to believe many of these hidden curriculum ideas. We're very proud of our ability to persevere and to suffer for the sake of others. I mean, you see that even in comments and phrases that are very common, like, oh, she has a nurse bladder. Well, what does that mean? I mean, we're proud that we can ignore our physical needs longer than other humans can for the sake of the work. And it's a source of shared pride, but also a source of shame if you don't have that ability. I can remember being in the operating room and feeling shamed because I needed to step out. This is a 6-hour case. Are you kidding me? But you're not really allowed to have that need, or you feel that. But I think what you're saying is when you come into this with a stronger sense of your own values, you may be able to engage with that in a healthier way.
Yeah. In a way, I'm sure if you took, a group of clinicians in a room, they could all tell you stories of bad stuff that happened.
Oh, I know.
And bad things that landed on us and maybe nudged our identity. I certainly remember my younger self being influenced by the culture around me and having some pretty awful attitudes, actually, in how I thought of the people formerly known as patients, how I thought about people in the workplace. And I think, looking back, it was to an extent a protective mechanism for myself. And we put in unhelpful protective mechanisms sometimes when we don't have good, genuine, robust, effective coping strategies. But yeah, looking back on my younger self, there are things that I am not proud of.
Things you've learned since then.
Yeah, very much.
What about emotional needs of clinicians and this whole idea of professional detachment?
Yeah, we had a fascinating discussion with some of our more senior medical students recently when we were using humanities. We were using creative writing to help us explore some of our own responses and some of our own reactions. And as part of that, we had a discussion, a roundtable discussion with the students about, a really simple question that we put out and said, is it okay for clinicians to cry
Wow.
with their patients or in front of their patients? And these are students at very, early stage of their career. And the views were so diverse. So some of them felt, all sorts of these ideas came out. Some of them felt, well, of course it's not. You have to be professional. And of course it's not okay to cry with or in front of your patients. And then others said, maybe those with a more empathetic personality type and, that type of expression would say, well, I'm really worried about how much emotion there is in medicine, and particularly in some specialties, maybe more so than others. And I don't know how I will cope with all of this emotion. So we talk about, so we're then able to invite some clinicians to talk about their experience of going to a patient's funeral or crying with a patient. And there's no right answer. There isn't a right answer for that, but it's a fascinating exploration. But I think there is something about emotion that we can tap into as well, rather than talking about that, again, that behavioural thing. What's on the outside? Do you cry or do you not cry? That's the outward manifestation of what's happening inside.
Yeah. And there's something about what's happening inside and acknowledging it, giving it a place that gives you some clues about what's going on with you and what you need.
Yeah, I think there's something really, we've discussed it in some previous episodes, haven't we? This body mind, cognitive and emotional dualism, which is not really helpful. And I think for me, a really helpful way of considering emotion is that there are things that happen in the workplace, in life, that make us sad, mad, or glad.
Yeah.
And for me, being able to recognize that when I have a strong emotional response, it's usually because something isn't right. And rather than pushing that emotion away, I'm beginning to learn to slow down, breathe, pause, and ask, what is it that creates this emotion?
Yes.
What is it that's not right? And do I need to address something? I think when we think about emotion with patients, we're recognizing suffering isn't right.
Yes.
We don't want there to be suffering. And so to deal with that concept of emotion in consultation, we need to have a good personal worldview of suffering and what that is. And people will have their own individual view. As you know, my view is that as a follower of Jesus, that actually biblical critical theory gives me a way of thinking about suffering. It doesn't give me easy answers,
No,
because there aren't any, but it gives me a way of processing it and thinking about it.
And finding your place in it. That there is a place for meaning to come into suffering. And once meaning comes into suffering, there is the potential and the hope for a transformative experience. And clinicians often find themselves in that crossroads of emotion in the midst of suffering, their own and their patients, and need to find the way through. And you're talking about that. Like through your worldview, you can reach an understanding of the meaning in any individual. It's difficult. It's not a protocol. It's going to be case by case exploration of what's the emotion in this, what's the experience in this, and what's the transformative experience that we can move toward.
And I think as well, when we talk about emotion and we talk about how that is so significant when we face suffering,
Mm.
that I think one of the challenges is that we often try to deal with it individually.
Mm.
And we often try and deal with it as me. Whereas connection and community, we know is so, so important
Wow.
in this area. And that could lead us on to a whole area of discussion, couldn't it, about individualism and what's the impact of individualism and a cultural dominance of radical individualism, and how does that impact on clinician well-being? And that's an interesting area as well.
Certainly, if what we're telling our clinicians is that you have to deal with your emotions and your experience alone, then we are withdrawing a huge amount of support and power from community comfort. How many times have you sat in a nursing station and shared comfort with one another in a really difficult and painful patient outcome and comforted each other with truth? That experience, if all you know is an individual strength, that is not available to you. I know there's plenty of clinicians who don't feel that they can participate in that.
Yeah. I wonder as well whether our move in medicine, as we've had this phenomenal acceleration of medical knowledge and medical science, which is amazing, the breakthroughs that we've had. But there's so much knowledge, isn't there? There's like 10,000 new pieces of interesting data relevant to medicine available every week, or some outrageous. And we can't all keep up with all of that. And so what has happened is that medical clinicians and other healthcare providers have become more and more narrow in their focus just to keep up with the pace of discovery. And it means we don't just now have specialists in a particular body system, but we've even got within that specialists in a single organ. And then we even now have specialists in a single disease within that single organ, within that single system.
Hey, healthcare heroes, have you been impacted by this podcast? I've been working on making this content freely available to all of you through my nonprofit, and I would love for you to be able to help me in this effort. You can make a tax-deductible donation at our website, restorehealthcareproject.org. Thank you for helping me champion hope.
And we understand how we've gone in that direction, but that is precisely the opposite direction to what our population and our communities need, because we have more and more people in most contexts in the world who are experiencing multimorbidity. And so they are becoming the multimorbidity and the polypharmacy is a huge issue in medical practice, but we've got patients who then have to see more and more specialists with all of their diseases, and it's really difficult to connect the dots with those and keep those together. And it actually also tends to drive a move towards further individualism, tribalism, and isolation, in a sense, for almost the clinician and the patient.
Wow.
And so it's not surprising that we have increasing anxiety in our population and increasing risk of burnout, because in that context of that increasing specialism and people working only with specialists in their own area, it's so much harder for the clinician to build a supportive, reflective community.
Yeah. So there's a less of a opportunity for connection, cross-cultural connection, even within our medical field. And you're simply pointing that out in the specialties, not even beginning to scratch the surface of between disciplines. right? Between physicians and nursing and therapists and all of the support staff that we work with on a daily basis who carry integral parts of our healthcare system. This isolation because of the individual focus has been harmful. So, I mean, we're starting to just touch on what are some of the things that are eroding from our culture, eroding in on clinician humanity. I think another big one that we've talked about that I'd love to hear you touch on is ambition.
Okay.
What about ambition?
Ambition. Yeah, ambition. Ambition is a good thing, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
In a sense,
Is it?
in that I suppose there's a fundamental human desire for progress, to make things better than they are at this moment in time. That is, in my view, it's a gift from God. It's a form of hope to see things better than they are now. So that's a beautiful and a positive thing. But when it becomes distorted, it can become toxic ambition. And toxic ambition, I don't think we'd struggle to find a clinician or an academic anywhere who would not be able to tell us a story of some kind of toxic ambition.
They'd find an illustration. Yes.
It would be easy to find an illustration, wouldn't it? And we can see it in others. And actually sometimes we see it in ourselves. I've wrestled with toxic ambition myself in different contexts, and it's been a hard process in many ways. I've done it in my clinical, I've seen it in myself in clinical work, and I've also experienced it myself in my academic work. So I don't think it's a thing that we deal with once and move on. I think it's something that we constantly have to work with. I guess ambition is the desire to see my own career better.
Okay.
But it can become toxic, can't it? And I think the mechanism for that toxicity is that that in a desire to improve my own status, sometimes, or sometimes autonomy, or whatever that might be, it breeds comparison.
Oh dear.
And our good friend Susanna Hunt, who has a lovely phrase to describe this, which is, when comparison comes in the door, contentment goes out the window. And that's just a lovely truism, isn't it? And of course, there have to be benchmarks in life, and we must compare ourselves with benchmarks. But when the benchmark becomes comparison with other people, that's when ambition becomes toxic. When we compare ourselves with others, because as soon as we start comparing ourselves with others from a starting point of that kind of ambition, we fail then to cheer them on and to be their advocate and their partner and to support them.
Wow.
And I think for me, I know when my ambition is out of control, when I feel unable to celebrate their successes.
So to you, that's the symptom that clues you in.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
I need to reset.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes for me, it's meant entirely because I have maybe sometimes felt that my own character is not able to graciously do that for others. I've had to actually step away from the process entirely.
Oh, talk on that a little bit. What does that look like?
What does that look like? In academia, Sometimes certain institutions will have a time of year, a season, the promotion season. I don't know if this happens everywhere.
This is academia. Yeah.
There's a promotion season. So there's a particular time of year when panels are sitting to decide whether someone meets the benchmark criteria for promotion. And I became very slowly, not immediately, it wasn't an overnight thing, but for me, I was in a season that was the promotion season.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself legitimately looking at the criteria, looking at the benchmark and ticking off, yes, I meet that one. No, I don't meet that one. Yes, I meet this one. How am I going to meet that one that I don't need? And that in itself would have been okay. But what I found was that I was beginning to compare with some of my peers and say, well, they'll be able to meet that one because they've had an opportunity to do that thing. And I didn't get that opportunity. And I start then begrudging that my peer is doing something for the good of teaching and learning, for the good, for the good of the academy, for the good of the faculty. And then over a period of about 2 or 3 weeks, I started to recognize that my support of those individuals, my ability to come alongside them, to cheer them on, to celebrate their projects and their achievements and what they were doing was really diminished. And I was not, I was less happy at work than I normally am at work. So for me, I had to actually reflect on that and say, my character is not yet ready to apply for that promotion in a way that still allows me to be the colleague I want to be to my peers, to be the teacher I want to be to my students. And so I deleted the benchmarking, the criteria, and I did not put anything in that promotion season. And I had to say, do you know what? And it wasn't even that good a promotion for me in some ways. So I had to get a grip. Yeah. This promotion wouldn't give me any more money. It wouldn't necessarily change what I do day to day. It was simply to get a different title.
But it feeds something inside of you that rises to that challenge. But the negative side effect of that you noticed, it sounds like to some degree, it interrupted your ability to connect.
Yes.
In a human way, in the way that lines with your value to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that side effect, this pursuit was not worth it to you. I think that's
I wanted it.
Yeah.
But I had to realize that it wasn't good, and I stepped away and I deleted all that stuff, and I felt a sense of release after I decided, and I had to tell some of my colleagues. I said to them, I'm not. So people would ask, "Oh, are you putting in for whatever?" And I said, "No, I'm actually not, because I'm not emotionally ready to be able to do that in a way that aligns with my values."
Wow.
And so I put it aside, and I did not apply for it, and I still haven't.
I think this is a beautiful and stark reminder for us that we are free. I think a lot of times we feel caught up in the current of the culture, and ambition is one of those things that just seems like an inevitable force that you follow. There is this progression you're supposed to have in healthcare, and to resist it seems impossible. But you've just outlined and modeled for us a way to actually step outside that current. It's difficult, it's brave, and it's an inner struggle, but you are free inside to make those decisions. And I think this is critical for us to actually take an active part in reclaiming our humanity, reclaiming who am I in this? And do I need to just be carried along in this current or not? Is this right for me? And it didn't interrupt relationship to make that decision, did it? Did it make it different in your relationship with your colleagues?
I think it enhanced my relationship with my colleagues when I said, I am just not emotionally ready for that process, because if I get rejected, if I
Mm.
apply and I get rejected, I'm actually not sure how I'll cope with that.
Mhm.
And I also said I'm not sure it was making me the kind of person that I wanted to be. And they were surprised.
Mm.
And I think I had a degree of respect for that
I think
decision.
so.
Yeah.
I feel that. Do you think now, after these years of your career have progressed, would you say you have a different way of measuring achievement than you used to?
Yeah,
What is that?
absolutely. I think I have had to reframe my own success metric.
Mm.
And on that example, that story that I gave you, which is just part of my lived experience to illustrate the point, and it won't necessarily be the same for everyone, but that's just my way of expressing that. But how did I navigate that without feeling like a failure? Like I'm not good enough for promotion, or I'm not good enough for that. I had to say, well, actually, for me, reframing success is about going home at the end of the day and thinking, I did a good day's work today. I did my best. I was available for my colleagues, and I was available
Mm.
for students and willing to be interrupted. When you're on this trajectory of career progression, it can be um, very consuming, can't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah.
And it makes it ruins the margins. And often those little things that we're doing for promotion are the above and beyond, the extras, and they take up the margins. They
Mm.
don't just take up the margins in our time, which is the obvious place where we work a little bit later. Um, uh, from our already late schedule, potentially, where we work a little bit later. And so there's the time margins, but it's also those human margins where we can make time to mentor someone else, to help
Mm.
them with the paper that they're trying to write or work on, or the student who's struggling with the assignment, the project,
Mm.
whatever. And it just squeezes me
Mhm.
into the margins. It makes me uninterruptible.
Wow.
And I noticed that in a previous, a number of years ago, when I had a analogous journey of having to right size my ambition and reframe my success metrics. And a little bit of feedback that I got from some of my peers at that time was, you were sometimes difficult to interrupt.
Ooh.
And that, I think that again is a symptom. Am I difficult to interrupt? Have I squeezed myself right to the margins
Mhm.
and not left a little bit of space for others around the side? And that can be emotional, can't it? Or it can be academic, or
Mhm.
it can be cognitive, whatever,
Mhm.
whatever frame that can take.
Do you find that you need to reset your metric on a regular basis? Do you find that? And how do you assess how to is it a reprioritization? Is it a trimming? How do you get it back to what is important to me and get my ambition priorities back to healthy state?
Yeah, that's good. I guess that's part of rhythms.
Mm.
As people, as humans, we have interesting rhythms in our lives already, don't we? We have, we have days, we have weeks, we have seasons, we have years. And for me, I suppose we have an academic year, and so there are certain points in the year. The start of an academic year, the start of the calendar year,
Yes.
and these are points in the year when it's a real opportunity to pause and reset and articulate your values and what's important, ideally with, supportive others. And you have to, we have to find those supportive others in our lives who understand our values and are aligned with those values as well. So I guess for me, I can now see, it's promotion time of year coming round in my institution.
Yeah.
This is the time for me to reset my success metric. And to say, and to really articulate my success metric. And my success metric might be create and then we plan. I'm going to create some space in my calendar to make sure I've got some margins for interruption. It might be a day away, a full day away, without, maybe a digital free day. Digital free days are amazing for resetting. Everybody knows that green space is fantastic for resetting, but you have to be accountable and you have to articulate it. Otherwise it drifts so easily.
You've got to reclaim it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Because there is that, the tide comes in. So good. Reclaiming our humanity, resetting our values so that we can stay who we are and become who we want to be. Thank you so much, Lysa. This has been an amazing conversation. Let's do it again because there's so much more. This has been the Restore Healthcare Project. I'm Dr. Jennifer Kang. Hey there, I want to tell you about an opportunity for you to get involved with us at Selah Health International on an upcoming mission trip. We are taking a team of health professionals to Bangladesh in March of 2025 to teach nursing and medical students and to minister the hope of Jesus. If you are interested in being on this team with me, you can find out more on our website, selahhealthinternational.org. Click on Get Involved and volunteer to apply.